Good afternoon. This is tea time for week 6, when we're discussing women in conflict and refugee circumstances. This topic was not a topic that I necessarily would have included when I put together my class at Stanford and the book and this MOOC for that matter. I'm one of the lucky people who in fact has not experienced war directly in my life. I've been affected by it, certainly, as everyone in the world has been, but I haven't experienced it directly. But when I went back to the Global Fund for Women and reviewed the materials that women had been sending to the Global Fund, I realized that women caught in war and refugee circumstances was an extremely important issue for women around the world. There are so many conflicts going on, and what we've learned, of course, is that violence against women and other major human rights and health problems are greatly proliferating and increasing during times of war. So I decided to include this topic in my course and in my book and now in the MOOC because it does. So I decided to include this topic in my course and in the book and in the MOOC because it affects so many women around the world and it is such an important issue for women's health and human rights. I'll interrupt myself for a moment and have a sip of my tea this week. I'm drinking from a little Royal Albert teacup, which I picked up at a little sale here in Maine. As you see, I'm still in my cabin in Maine, in the northeastern part of the United States. The tea that I'm drinking, maybe appropriately enough, is gunpowder tea. It is a tea that is developed, essentially it's a strong green tea developed in China. But apparently the English, when they tasted this tea and realized that it looked like little pellets, it's made with tea leaves rolled into little pellets, and they thought it looked like, I suppose, something to do with guns and ammunition, and they called it gunpowder tea. It's quite tasty, and so I thought I would use gunpowder tea this week when we're talking about war. A very, very serious topic. I'd like to reinforce the suggestion that you read all of the readings for this week on this topic, including Chapter 7 of my book, in which I discuss the various stages of war, the beginning, the war itself, the time that people flee from their homes, and then the aftermath of war. All of these stages bring different and serious health and human rights issues to women. We have a number of resources this week that I think are very important. There are the interviews, the main interview really with Tila Chalmers on her work having to do with refugees. I also invited Marianne Sachs from the Netherlands to speak with me about her work in Europe with refugees. And then we were very excited to have Zainab Bangura from the United Nations speaking with us about rape and sexual abuse in conflict. She's the special United Nations representative on this topic, and she happened to be visiting Stanford, and I was able to have an interview with her. So I highly recommend that you watch these interviews. We also have a number of resources that are to be found on our companion website, internationalwomenshealth.org, www.internationalwomenshealth.org. On that website, we've included a recent article from the Atlantic Monthly, which discusses the situation of women in Gaza. It's written by a female Israeli writer, and it takes up the question of the situation of women in Gaza. I also highly recommend your going to the website of Human Rights Watch and looking at the information about the materials that they've included on women in war. They write in recent materials on the situation of women in Syria in particular. There are so many conflicts going on now, and women and others are recovering and dealing not only with the conflicts that are happening now, but the aftermath of many other conflicts around the world. It's shocking to realize how many conflicts, in fact, are in process now. And I write about that in my book and the materials that we've included on our companion website also refer to this. A very important link that we have both here on the MOOC and on our companion website is the link to Security Council Resolution 1325. In recent years, people have become much more aware of how war affects women differently from men. And Security Council Resolution 1325, which was promulgated in the early 2000s, only then after many, many years of conflict and war. But still, this resolution was passed at the United Nations, having to do with women and war and peace. It particularly encourages governments, in fact, more than encourages governments, to include women in the peace process in war. Obviously, women are very involved in war and refugee circumstances, and some people, even a UN official, noted that to be a woman in wartime now is often, or perhaps always, more dangerous than to be a soldier. The point being that something needs to be done about the situation of women in war. So, Security Council Resolution 1325 went a long way toward encouraging governments and even providing ideas for governments to actively involve women in the peace processes during war and refugee times. This has not happened in many countries, but in some countries it has, notably the Congo, for example, where more women have been involved in the peace negotiations. The article that I mentioned on Gaza presented information about the extent to which the Security Council resolution has been followed. And it's rather depressing to realize that in major conflicts now, including the conflict in Gaza, there are almost no women involved in the peace negotiations. I wonder to what extent we think this would make a difference. I'd be very interested in your views on the forums if you would respond to that question that I pose. How much difference do you think it would make to have women involved in the peace processes, or much more actively involved in issues around conflict and war, especially in issues having to do with peace? On that note, I think I will end by having another sip of my gunpowder tea. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week when we'll be talking about women's attempt to escape from poverty by accessing the cash economy. And we're coming near now to the end of this course. Next week and then the week after that will be our final week when we speak about aging. And then we look to the future with 4 interviews from people speaking about what they think is upcoming for women in the future. That will be the end of our course for this time. In any case, this is the end of our little tea time today. Thanks for listening. Bye.